All right, welcome. Hello, everyone. This is Raj from the Internet Society, welcoming you to our third APEC Insights. This is a special edition today for those who've joined us in previous sessions. Usually, we have a couple of people in the session, but with the ones we've done in the past, we had quite a few requests coming in that people are still grappling with how they should be working from home and all the challenges that that brings about. So we thought we'd do a special session today with my good friend Phillip Raskin. Phillip and I have known each other for many, many years, and we've done lots of interesting things together in the past. However, this is a bit of a first for us, particularly doing something virtually of this nature. So before I begin, Phillip, a quick question for you. So it's a Wednesday afternoon. Two aging bald men are on a Zoom call. What do they talk about?
Hairstyles?
Indeed. So the reason I asked Phillip that, of course, is the other little thing he does is there's a bit of stand-up comedy and improv comedy routine. So maybe he'll throw in a few little tricks along the conversation as well. All right. So let's get on with it. So it'll just be me and Phillip. What we will also do is my colleague Noel will be online and we'll be keeping tabs on the chat windows and the various social media things that we are broadcasting on so that we can see what sort of questions you're asking. And then, of course, we'll put those to Phillip as well. With that, I don't really want to start talking about COVID-19 and the pandemic again. I think everyone's been talking that to death, literally. And so we'll try and avoid using the word pandemic, except for this moment. And of course, COVID-19 and all that. I think what we'll focus on is what exactly we need to be doing in having to deal with the fact that a lot of us are working from home. Now, obviously, the region has been quite severely affected by the social distancing measures, the shutdowns, and so on and so forth. But there's also been a varied set of responses across the region in how countries have dealt with it. One thing that is common, however, is that companies have had to shut down. They've had to adopt new ways or adopt and adapt to these new normal, as it were. And it does appear that going forward, I've seen media reports, and I'm sure all of you have as well, that some companies are now contemplating that this may be the way of working for the future. Now, obviously, not all companies and organizations can work in this way. There's some constraints, obviously. Certain industries, certain sectors, certain types of businesses need people to function, as in people being there physically, doing things physically. But there are also a whole bunch of other sorts of roles and jobs that can potentially transition to this working from home or virtual working or teleworking. There's all sorts of words that have been used over the years in how to describe this. One other interesting thing, of course, is if we sort of look back 10 odd years ago, telecommuting and remote working were sort of buzzwords, but they never really took hold. The pandemic has, of course, forced us to get into those sort of things. Now, one of the interesting things that I came across several weeks ago whilst on social media was a comment someone posted where they said, "You're not working from home. You are at your home during a crisis trying to work." I thought that was an interesting comment. I don't quite remember who exactly said it and where, but I do know I read it on social media and I just noted that down. And I think that was an interesting statement to make. The feeling sometimes, however, is that it's no longer a crisis and this has become the new norm. So on that point, I'll now turn to Phillip for some opening thoughts on where he thinks things are heading. Now, Phillip has worked all across the region and he's been involved in a lot of things. And so I think he'll speak from a bit of those, from those experiences a little bit, but as well, He's got a new gig at the moment, which is all about helping people work from home. So this is the reason, of course, he's with us today. And so let's have a short chat first, Philip, and then we'll go on to some greater things.
Greater things being slides. Thanks, Raj. Yeah, actually, I think that's a good way to frame it. I, like everybody else, was affected as an office worker who worked from home since February. And we all had to adapt to this. I think it's now become something that I'm doing full time. So I've actually gotten very involved with a simulation to teach people how to work remotely. So that's my full-time gig. But like everybody else, you know, I've also had that same adjustment period, same learning period, and same. I think that quote puts it very well. Your home is not really set up to work from initially. You know, there's a reason you had an office. There's a reason you went to work, and so the challenges we're facing are how to live with what we have and even find ways to excel in it. So that's kind of what I'm doing these days for myself, which includes trying to figure out my webcam up until a half hour ago to now.
So that's interesting. So this morning, Philip and I were back and forth, and he was telling me about his trials and tribulations with his webcam and his audio and all sorts of things. And it really brought home the fact that, you know, we are calling it the new normal, but things are not normal. You know, one question I have is, for instance, if the printer breaks down, who do you call? You don't have an IT person in your premises anymore because you're working from home. Yes, maybe you've got some young chap at home, your nephew, niece, son, daughter, who can perhaps help you fix your IT things. But the fact remains that you, for a lot of people, this means, you know, going it alone and living with what they have. The other problem, of course, is that there's a whole variety of regional experiences that we have. You know, if you happen to be in a developed country in the region, and although I must also say that some developed countries have faced all sorts of issues as well with working from home, but contrast that to some of the developing parts of the region, for instance, where infrastructure is a problem. And this transition to working from home, that's entirely dependent on using the internet, of course. I mean, there's no other way to do it. So on that point, Philip, if I were to ask you, if the internet didn't exist, I know we wouldn't be having this call right now, for instance. So that's right. One. But how else would have things played out? I mean, could we have coped?
Well, we did for a long time. You know, we had a world of teleconferences for a long time, since, you know, the 1940s and 50s. You have even that Mad Men type of office had that. So we did have that. We flew different places. I think we were much more judicious about when we needed to have a meeting. We did a lot more prep. I think as the tools came in and it became easier, you could just call a meeting without so much prep. But, you know, we found a way before. And, you know, I don't think the internet's going anywhere anytime soon, but it's we'd find a way again. I think that's human beings will always find a way to get those things done, but sometimes the steps will be a bit messy or a bit in process.
So we'll come back to the comment you made about the internet, of course, because I think there's some issues that we need to deal with to ensure that the internet remains what it is and where it is and how it works for us. But this is probably a good time to start talking about some of the practicalities of working from home. I believe you've got a couple of ideas for people in terms of how to approach this working from home. And so you want to share those, and I think you've got a couple of slides maybe you want to run through, and then we'll continue the discussion after that.
Sounds good. Yep, it wouldn't be a Zoom call without some slides. But in general, I know there's about 1 million articles out there that we've all seen about how to be effective working from home and, you know, how to make your space or things like that. But I think there are larger philosophical questions that come with it. So those are the ones that I did try to approach, although we'll talk about some of the other ones as well. So let me pop some slides up and see where we are. And get that full screen, I hope. There we go. Okay, so yes, the new normal. My company is called Work is Play. That's my logo down there, so in case that doesn't come through. So basically, I think, you know, the main thing we've had is WHF, work from home, has become WTF at times. And so here's just 5 philosophies to to keep in mind that I think they're not necessarily tips, but they're just ways of thinking and ways of approaching that can really help. So we'll go through these one by one, but essentially it's about how you share your information, how you set your limits, how you work together on documents, how you think about others, and how you break it all down and start again. So one of the biggest things I think that we've seen is the idea of synchronous or asynchronous information sharing. So we don't usually use the term, but obviously synchronous is when we all sit in a meeting together, we learn the same thing at the same time, and we say thanks, and we move on to the next thing. Asynchronous is going to be when you don't do that. So I think one of the things to think about is we've had so many meetings, and I probably am coming from a place of personal complaint. In my old job, when we had work from home starting, every Monday we had a 10 a.m. meeting to talk about the status of it, an 11 o'clock leadership meeting that went till 12:30, a 1 o'clock pre-client meeting, a 3 o'clock client meeting. So by the time I got to the end of the day, I had done nothing but meetings, which is all sharing information. There's a lot of different ways to share information that doesn't necessarily have to wait for that meeting. And there are ways to do it. So you can reach out to your people, give them the information ahead of time. It doesn't have to wait. You can do things in subgroups. You can set up messaging groups, shared sites. Somebody that I work with works at a university in the UK, and it's very, very slow even now. So whenever they get to a major point, it takes 2-3 weeks to call the meeting. And when the meeting happens, not everybody's there. So what she started doing was making just a 10-minute PowerPoint, like a YouTube video, just putting a voice to it, or even doing everybody's got a webcam and we're used to seeing each other on camera. So why not just take a 5-minute video, post it, get it to those 20 people, instead of hoping that 18 of them or 16 of them show up. So find that way, let them digest it when they're ready, not when they're at the meeting, checking something else, doing something else. So it's a real advantage, actually. And it's something, it just requires a shift to break yourself out of that habit. And I'm guilty of it too. I'm so used to the meeting cycle that I forget I can just update somebody differently, and it will save everybody time. And then when they make a decision, they've got my information involved there too. So that's philosophy one.
Look, if I can just come in here quickly.
Yeah, please.
So this is something that constantly annoys me.
Not just me then.
And no matter how many times one says that, when you have a meeting, and be it an online meeting or the old physical meetings, the amount of time people spend giving updates is quite incredible. And if you're doing that online, if you're doing it virtually, that takes even longer. So, I mean, assuming, let's say you have 1 hour for a meeting, and you've got, let's say, 10 people on the call. If everyone gives a 5-minute update, that's 50 minutes gone. So when do you actually have the meeting? So you're quite right here, and I fully agree with this, that you can share the information separately in various ways. You can even send an email as the most simplest form, that this is what it is. Yeah. And spend the time on substantive matters, fixing problems, as opposed to talking about problems or what may be problems. So yeah, back to you.
Okay, no, that's a really valid point, Raj. I mean, I think the meetings are sort of two types. One is we're all trying to level set the information and all have the same information. The others are trying to use the information and do something. And so often it's that first one. It's just we're all getting everybody up to speed. You leave the meeting and then the real work begins. So why not do it ahead of time? Okay, so that's number one. Number two is set limits, and I think that's the challenge for all of us. And I think, as you said, Raj, this is not an office. This is my house. My cat is going to try to jump up here. My wife and son are going to come back soon. It's really hard to set limits in your house, and then you've got to set them with your colleagues. So a couple things. One is figure out when you're good at working and be really tough about it. If after 6 p.m. you're useless, that's okay. Just admit that, and then don't take a meeting at 7. Especially background meetings, especially if you have a regional job or any kind of work with partners outside of your country, especially in Asia. I mean, how many time zones do we have in Asia? you're going to end up being on the phone at midnight, on the phone at 6 a.m. or on the call. And it's just going to be challenging. So you have to really be clear about it. You have to say it over and over so people will believe it. And then the last part is don't be a jerk about it, which is sometimes a challenge for me too, which is to say, look, I can't help you now because this is my time for X, but here's how I can help you. So it's not so much about just blocking off your colleagues and putting a wall up and saying, forget it, that's it. I know as an American, that's our style, is to just get in your face. But in truth, if you can be almost redirecting, I can't do this, but I can do this. I'm not going to do this, but I can do that. Because what invariably happens is you get this scope creep where somebody had a 3 o'clock call or a 3 o'clock Zoom, that's a 4 o'clock, that's a 4:30. And you have to have this limit to say, listen, I wanted to talk to you. I really want this information or to have this meeting, but you're up against my limit here. And it's hard because with colleagues, you have all these different relational problems. You have people that are your supervisor, you have people that you are supervising, you have people that you want to engage and you want to keep engaged with you. So it's not about being really hard, it's just about being really clear. And the problem is because we're all trying to set the limits and we're not in an office that has a regular hours, we have to just keep repeating it. Everybody's got to get to learn each other. So it gets a little repetitive, but eventually it starts to take, and it's so much easier. Okay. All right. So moving on. Shared and live documents are your friends. I think this is a little bit like the meetings, but especially about emails and just the amount of back and forth that we do or used to do in an office. It's not really that important which platform you use. If you want to do Basecamp, if you want to do Google Docs. I had a major multinational tech client and all the communications fit into one Google Sheet. And I was surprised that we were using Google Sheet, just one sheet, but that was it. And it made it easy because everything was there. You could always update it, you could always change it, and you could always know what was happening because that was the Bible, that was it, that was the thing. So it's a bit challenging because people will still start to share information through emails, through other places. But the number of times I've been working on a paper, a document, it's gone back and forth. Somebody else needs to look at it. Somebody else needs to look at it. The CEO needs to look at it. You've got, you're in version 17. It's really painful. And I think that you can save just so much trouble because we don't need to do it this way. If we've got the tool and we're all connected, then use the tool, simplify, and you can see what's happening anyway. So I don't know how ISOC's doing things, if you wanted to share, Raj, but or not.
Yeah, why don't you keep going?
All right, keep going. The fourth thing is frame information appropriately. Ask people what they need. Ask people what they need to know. I am a huge hater of the CC, especially the lazy CC, which is I wanted to tell you this, but I don't really want to take the time to make it make sense for you. So here you go. Here's another CC. My former industry was public relations, so we're pitching journalists, we're talking to media influencers, and you have to be really clear. You can't just send them a white paper and say, I hope you find the part that relates to our client. You got to pull it out. You've got to say it's on this page, retype it, whatever it is. So that's a really important thing. One of the things that I do now is because I do this simulation, we end up role playing. So you are finance for 30 minutes, you are sales for 30 minutes, you are delivery, you're admin, and you learn a lot. When you're finance for 5 minutes, you learn how much stuff people give you that you don't need, and you learn how to ask for what you need. So if you can just do that, that really helps. And it doesn't just help others, it helps you because you get rid of the clutter. You don't keep so many emails for that piece of information. So don't be afraid to pull it out and reframe it. My rule of thumb is that anything that we did 6 months ago was our old way of working. So if you're stuck to something from 6 months ago, it may not still be valuable or as valuable. Oh, and I said that point right there. There we go. Break the process. So yeah, if there's stuff that you like, if you have team meetings that are fun, great, keep them. There's no reason to just get rid of everything. but really look at what's working. So a lot of times we've seen people completely break down the monthly report, the weekly meeting, all the admin stuff. We've seen those get just thrown out because they're not useful for this way of working. If you can have a live document, there's no need to have a whip meeting. You can use that meeting for something else. So think about what you're trying to achieve. Don't be afraid to change something. And always just test it out. It will evolve and get better and better as you go. So that's kind of it for now. Those are my 5 things to talk about. I think we have one more to talk about towards the end. So I'll stop sharing slides and get back to people.
Yeah, thanks for those 5 philosophies. Philip, maybe you want to write a book about them. I don't know. So some interesting points you brought up, obviously, and some of them obviously really resonated with me and perhaps with folks on the call as well today. But okay, so philosophy is fine, right? But we also need to talk about the practicalities, right? So when we say we're working from home, that H in WFH stands for home, right? And you mentioned earlier that there's always challenges at home, and setting those boundaries is so very important. But sometimes it's very difficult to set those boundaries, right? One thing that I've been experiencing, for instance, is in the good old days when one could travel and one used to go to conferences and meetings in a foreign country. One used to go to this thing called an airport and get onto this thing called an aircraft and then fly through the sky and all those good old days. But the point being, if I was, for instance, going to a particular meeting let's say I'm going to Thailand for a series of meetings, I know for that period of time, that is the only thing that I can do. Now that everyone or most of us are working from home and there is no travel to speak of, at least no work travel, it sometimes feels like there's just so many requests that come in, so many asks that come in. Can you do this? Can you speak at this? Can you attend this? Can you participate in this? I did this little exercise a couple of weeks ago when I got quite annoyed by a lot of these requests. On one particular day, I was asked to speak in 7 different sessions at the same time. Okay, and those 7 requests came from different parts of the region, and one from Europe as well. So 6 in the region, 1 outside of it, and all it so happened timed at the same time. And a couple of people that I responded to saying, politely declining, saying I can't because I'm already committed. One of them actually got very annoyed, saying, "But you are not traveling. There is no travel. Why can't you join this?" So there seems to be this misconception that now that people are not going to the offices or not traveling for work, that they've got all the time in the world. But that's not the case, is it? And the other little thing that comes into play, and this is in fact a question that came from one of our attendees who sent a written question before the session, saying that, how do we actually convince our bosses that when we're at home, we're actually working and not lazing around or having fun or watching movies or doing whatever else that they may think we'd be doing. So how do you balance that then? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's actually one of the hardest things about working from home. And I think that's the, it's been said in HR circles that they always allowed work from home on Fridays because Fridays were proven to be less productive in the office than other days. So they had some metric that Fridays were roughly 60% as productive as a Monday. So, okay, fine, you can work from home on Friday because it doesn't matter. That is the hardest thing because we somehow envision complete freedom, and we also have bosses that envision like a police state, and we have to find this balance between the two. And I think it becomes a relationship management issue for a lot of people because there are some people that are very old school and they still want to see you. It's the same people that if you weren't at the office at 8 in the morning and still there at 7 at night thought you were slacking. And trust me, I mean, I spent 8 years working in Korea, so I mean I'm familiar with this model. But at the same time, you really have to move it to objectives and things you're doing. because that's what becomes bulletproof. So if you've got a to-do list of 12 things and you knock out 12 things, it's not really important if you decided to watch Avengers Endgame for half an hour during your lunch or whatever you're doing. It really has to be on that level. The challenge is if you have people you work with who don't work that way, and where your ability to influence the process is. So it's easy for me to say that because I tended to work in PR agencies, which are very independent working places, that they kind of just throw a bunch of stuff at you and say, go. And so not everybody has that luxury, but I think if you can start to take even a repetitive task or something that you do on a regular basis and break it out into objective-based versus time-based, then you can start to set the pattern.
So I suppose, I mean, again, I'm referring to the question that came in prior to the session today. So one bit is us, this is the me, you, and everyone on this call who are working for someone, for instance, and doing what we think is in the best interest of the organization.
Right.
But the second problem is what the perception is by your bosses on what is it you're actually doing, right? We can perhaps control what we think we're doing, but controlling the perceptions of others is problematic, right? And that I think probably needs a bit of cultural change too, particularly in this region, right? And you know, I think if you gave the example of Korea, but there are also other countries in the region where the work culture is very different, right? I mean, it's regimented, it's highly structured, and so on. I mean, one example I have is that, and Adrian might smile at this because this story comes from him originally. Adrian's one of my colleagues who's also on this call. It's for those wondering who is Adrian and why I'm referring to him. So there's this very large technology company, which is very often in the news these days, which still asks or requires employees to actually clock in. Now, if you remember, if you watch movies of the past, or if you watch, you know, factory environments and all that, you see people clocking in every day, right, with the punch card to mark the time that they entered the workplace and what time they left. But here we have a high-tech company and a company of the modern era who basically uses the same sort of processes as, you know, the old days, because it goes down to trust. But the thing they've changed, of course, is that instead of punching in a punch card on a clock mounted on the wall, you use an app on your phone to do that instead. But the fact still remains, the problem is still there, that there seems to be this, shall I say, inherent distrust that your employee will not be doing what they're supposed to be doing. That probably needs generational change, right?
I mean, you're getting a generation now that's used to doing things mobile, flex time when they want. And that was a generation, that's this generation, and that's built on the generation before that was all the programmers from Silicon Valley who did whatever. You know, I remember some famous stories with Microsoft where they tried to lock the programmers down and they all revolted and did it over midnight instead. So I think, yeah, it is one of those things that as generations go, it will become different. I think there's also a factor that it's almost impossible to watch everybody all the time as the boss. And having such a mass migration to remote work has resulted in people unable to control things, but things still get done. So I think when you have some of these supervisors that are very hands-on and they're just pulling all their hair out, and then at some point they realize, well, all these things got done anyway, so maybe I can take it back a notch or two. You know, it's not fully on board, but a little bit more. So I think you're right. Over time, the process will be that this is normal. I mean, we're used to people doing work on the phone now, right? There's so much that happens there, and that's 10 years.
Yeah, true. This is probably a good time for me to check in with Noel to see if we've got any questions from the audience that we want to tackle first. So Noel, how is it looking? Anything interesting?
Hi, Raj. We do have a question on the Zoom chat. And this is time boundaries are not working in developing countries, I think. How do we get rid of working long time and as a result, a rise in frustration?
Good question, and understand. Yeah, that is a tough thing. I think if you're going to have a long work day, is there a way to build spaces in the middle? You know, is that person riding you from, you know, crack of dawn till sunset? Do you have space in the middle? So you may end up with a long working day, but can you carve out something for yourself in the middle? Can you get some space to exercise, see family, well, all those things that are important? So yeah, you've got to be online and ready to go between these two times, but can you make it so that it's a normal amount of work hours?
Okay.
Right. And if it's a really, really uptight boss, can you have an alert system so that, you know, some major customer issue comes in and you can just, you know, I've got the phone, I'm here, I'm ready, that kind of thing. So you can build that trust maybe in about 5 times, 5 incidents, you know, where you're there and the person can relax. I mean, I think most of us don't want to babysit other people. We're doing it because we're scared. We're doing it because we're stressed. So if I can believe I don't have to babysit you, I will feel better and I can get to what I want to do too. Because there's a few people that just enjoy the control, but most of us, I think, just want to live our lives also. So if that's possible.
Yeah, I'd also perhaps suggest that some of that control nature also comes from insecurity, right? Some people are insecure
Yeah.
in what they have to deliver. I mean, they may be in a position of authority, but that doesn't mean they're not insecure. So I think that also comes into play. So that's why I was suggesting earlier, and this is sort of my response to the question as well, that this may be a generational thing that, you know, if you have a boss who is probably from a previous generation, their way of thinking and approaching things is different to what the next generation would think about. So, and you know, this current situation we are in is probably hastening all that. You know, the change in thinking, for instance. Noel, any other questions, or is that the only one for now? And shall we move on?
We have several from the Q&A. So work from home usually goes beyond the office timings and we end up working well past midnight. How do we balance this?
Ow.
I suspect that may be the most common concern, right? I know I suffer from that. So yeah, what are your thoughts, Philip? How do you deal with that?
I think, you know, it's, if you can break it down to have that conversation with the people about what they need from you, then you can start to have more control over how late you're doing it. In some cases, you know, it's, I mean, all of us have had jobs or times when the ask has been unrealistic and we just had to put the hours in to just make it go away. But I think that, you know, if you can have the discussion that's on a level of why am I here till midnight? What are the things you need from us? Then maybe you can get somewhere. You know, in going back to my world, it was always service industry. And so if we're there till midnight, the concern of the boss was we weren't getting paid for that. You know, the client wasn't paying enough for our service. They were giving us too much work. So then you're giving the boss something to do. Okay, maybe you can get some more money for this and get some more people, or you can say, we don't want to spend the money. So it is challenging, but I think if you can have the conversation with the person to find out what's the stuff you need to do, again, not about time, but about objectives.
And again, I think that, you know, the cultural barriers will also come into play. I think in some cultures in the region, you may be able to have that conversation with the boss, but in others, you will not be able to. Or if you happen to have a more junior level position, you know, you'll find it tough, right? Because you just, the expectations are far greater, right? Once you are middle and or senior, in a senior role, it probably gets a bit easier in being able to negotiate these sort of things. But, you know, so there's lots of challenges, and that, you know, early on when I was doing the intro, I talked about, you know, the diversity, the large region we have, and the diversity there is, and the different experiences that exist. Which probably is a good time for me to turn our attention to the technology dependencies that we would have to do all this. Because, you know, obviously one is this time management, managing boundaries and so on. But fundamentally, we are depending on technologies to make all this possible, right? Making this whole work from home thing possible. And I see my good friend Winthrop posted a comment in the chat window about shared document issues. He was speaking about live documents and so on, Philip. So this has been problematic for years and years, hasn't it? I mean, one is just the incompatibilities that exist across different platforms. Let's say a Microsoft online document to a Google online document. But then you also have the problem that within the Microsoft suite, depending on the version you're using, they will also have incompatibilities and formatting changes when you swap, right? So I don't think, in all the years that we've been at this, we still haven't fixed those basic issues of interoperability. And what that points me to is the fact that there is no open standard that everyone follows when it comes to documents and spreadsheets and whatnot. There are standards there, but it's just that people are using proprietary forms or hybrids, which then cause all sorts of issues. Any thoughts on that?
Actually, I was going to say the same thing. That's the thing, and I know that's a big internet society cause to champion. But yeah, it is an issue because as profitability is linked to people using platforms, you don't have the Linux of document sharing at that kind of level, and so people, I see we're picking on Microsoft, which is okay. That's a former client, but they have an interest in you using Word and not using something else. And that isn't the same as open, it's what point you're starting with, make a profit or have people work together.
Right.
So that is the challenge. You can simplify it to Google Docs, which works for most everybody. You can paste emails back and forth, but then that creates more emails. And you can do a lot of collaboration software will give you some space for free. But yeah, it is one of the challenges, and that result of students having to draw their sentences is crazy. But I can understand how you got there.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So that's one part of it. The other part, of course, and I saw this question, I think, in the Q&A forum in the Zoom chat, is one about connectivity itself, right? So, and this is very true. For instance, a lot of the new, let's say if you're doing some online course of some sort, or you got kids at home who are studying as well, a lot of video, a lot of multimedia is being used now, right? Which obviously depends on bandwidth. And we don't really have, if you look at the region, you're right now in Singapore, I'm right now in Australia. So we're okay. Well, it's debatable depending on where you are in Australia, but anyway, that's a different discussion, I think. But the point remains that, we have, or at least I have right now and you have right now, good bandwidth, and we can do this call in HD. I mean, I can see you, and I'm sure you can see me in HD. But others on this call may not be seeing us in HD. It may be at a lower resolution because their connectivity can't handle that, right? Same goes for other things that are being used. Even watching a YouTube video for example, right? And connectivity remains a big issue in the region. And the example I give is some years back, I was in Delhi, and I was on my 4G mobile phone, supposedly connected to a 4G tower. Everything was showing 4G, all the icons were showing 4G, but I could barely get more than 100 kilobits out of the connection I was on. 2 days later, I was in Seoul in Korea. Same thing, I was roaming on the same phone, everything was same, showing me the same 4G icons and all that. And I was downloading at 70 megabits, right? So a massive difference in the user experience, and that translates, to what you can do with what you have, right? So, I gave Delhi as an example, but, there's other places in the region which are much, much worse. So now we're saying that, work from home, we'll have all these technologies in place, all these things in place. But if you don't have the connectivity and access, and it's not just about connectivity, of course, it's also what the devices you use. So if you have an older computer, an older tablet, or older phone, some things will not work on that anymore, right? So where do people go then? And I fear that's where I think, I would look at governments. Governments have always said that we want to go digital, we want to build the digital economy, we want to invest in infrastructure. Very few have actually walked the talk, right? There's lots of talk, but very few actually walk the talk. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, their involvement is crucial. Yeah, I would agree with that. You see places, you were in Korea, I was in Korea for a long time. Speeds are ridiculous.
Right.
You're doing things on mobile data that are faster than people's broadbands at home sometimes.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's ridiculous. You're watching stuff, you're watching HD movies without a hiccup, and you don't even think about it after a while. But that's because there was a large investment, and it is, I think it's a key cog in digital transformation. It's kind of like you can't expect everybody in the country to get, say, physically fit if there's nowhere to exercise.
Right. Right.
You have to have that structure in place. Some organizations are helpful with it, and some cities and municipalities. So sometimes you see, like in the US, for instance, some cities were very strong about putting that infrastructure in, and some were laggards. Right? I think you had Philadelphia had a huge plan to just wire the city for free at one point, because they understand that that's going to be the impact. So if you don't have it, yeah, you have a lot of steps you have to take to try to catch up or work with what you have, as you say. So I think we even talk about that in a bit, but there's a lot of ways to get the PowerPoint ahead of time, or try to minimize how much live video you're doing. Especially, this is a huge bandwidth.
The problem with that would be, of course, is that it's depending on who you're interacting with, right? So if someone has high-speed connections and they want to do all this fancy stuff, and you're sitting on a tablet which has iOS 9.0 on it or something, there's only so much you can do, right? So that also becomes problematic. The other problem I see is that, as other parts of the world progress with the speeds they have and the connectivity and all the infrastructure they're putting in, people in those countries are developing new applications and services based on the infrastructure they have, not on the infrastructure we have, let's say, in Southeast Asia or parts of South Asia, right? And then when people from this part of the region want to use those technologies and applications and services, they don't work in the way they do, let's say, in Europe or the US or Japan or Singapore, for that matter, right? Because the infrastructure is not in place. And that's where I think, I know it's been a bit of a wake-up call for a number of governments in the region, but I think it still remains problematic, and there still needs to be a whole lot more done to ensure that, I see a question from Satish Kadam saying how work from home is going to replace traditional work environment post-pandemic. I think the answer to that is, it depends on how much governments prioritize digital infrastructure. Because the only way work from home is going to work is if we have the necessary infrastructure in place. Right, so I think we've spoken for quite a bit now. As we have about 15, 16 minutes left, I believe you've got some tips which may help with some of these questions as well, in terms of how work from home will replace traditional work and how.
Just one slide, really, but we'll pop it up there and have a talk. Let's see. Oops, and that's the wrong one. Hang on a second.
So it's obvious that even experts get it wrong, right?
Yeah, that's what, you think it was clear enough. So anyway, yeah, there's just a few tips as well, I think. And these are more just of the nuts and bolts variety, but one thing that I love doing is starting meetings at 2:05, 2:15, ending them at 3:40, this kind of stuff. It's just enough to shift people out from having, if you really stick to it, it forces people to not have that back to back to back to back to back, which is what really makes you lose your mind and also makes you really not productive. So force yourself to take breaks by just picking strange meeting times. We've all got notification services you don't have to remember. So that's a big one. Obviously with the IT, VPNs are really crucial, but not everybody has the same access to security or to their IT departments. It depends on where you're accessing from. And again, you can structure your work in a certain way. So I used to have VPN for certain things at work, but it was slower. So I would use VPN for that, and then I would step off VPN and do some other work and come back on, especially for anything that was sensitive. So if you can just structure your work that way, then at least you can minimize your disruptions. I think the third point we talked about, which was just trying to figure out how to manage your bandwidth as effectively as you can. You know, like the earlier example, you may not even need to have a video call. Maybe you can record yourself and send it. You know, find other ways to do it. Obviously, if everybody's running a race and they've got a sports car and you've got a very beat up old car, it's not going to be much of a race. So try to find a way to stay in it, but work with what you have. Also build in chunks. I mean, you know, all the research says that we work in 90-minute and 30-minute pieces. This is our circadian rhythm. I'm good for 2 90-minute chunks in a row, and then I need a break. I'm better if I have a 90-minute chunk and a break, but that doesn't always happen. So find ways to build that in. Use your regular meeting times, or just force in your gym time, force in your dog walk, force in your family time or your cooking, or whatever you do. Interact with something alive, not a computer. And the last part is the same as what you were saying, Raj. You know, give yourself a break. This is not normal. We call it the new normal, but this is not, we did not design this structure for work. We designed this structure to live in. We're managing to make it something for work because we're adaptable, and that's awesome. But it's not something that it was designed for. So when it doesn't quite work the way you were hoping, or just, you know, life is there, just be gentle with yourself, because it's hard. Be gentle with your colleagues, you know, if they can't respond to your message right away. You know, people have kids, people don't have kids, people have pets or family that they're, you know, interacting with, or they don't. And whatever your situation is, someone else has a different one, a different challenge. So just have some grace with yourself, have some grace with your colleagues.
So this really also, you know, brings up the point that, you know, and I guess I'm just repeating what we've said before, that it's the new normal, but it's not a normal that we chose to live in, right? I mean, it's a set of circumstances that has created this. And I think the other thing that I'm seeing in many ways, including you know, with some of my friends who run rather large companies, and they've been grappling with some issues as well. And a lot of people are still trying to replicate how the physical working environment was and assuming it'll work the same from home. That is not the case. I think that needs to be the starting point, right? That you cannot expect to replicate each and everything that happened in the office environment. Some things will have to be different. Some things will not be able to be done.
Yeah.
And yet there may be some new things which may be able to be done, at least in new ways. And perhaps then we'll find that they're a bit more efficient, and you know, our productivity goes up perhaps. But trying to just do like for like and replicating the physical world onto the virtual world, it doesn't work. And, you know, just as a side comment, the same works when we take, you know, people say that we need different sets of laws for the online world to the offline world. It's the same world, you know, so you can't really change it wholesale, right? You just need to adapt and adopt, as it were. Your last point about, you know, taking breaks and all that, you know, it also strikes me that, you know, fundamentally human beings are social animals, right? We thrive on social interaction. We thrive on, you know, talking to people. So one of the things that is, of course, missing from all this work from home environment is, you know, there are no longer any water cooler conversations. You don't chat with a colleague over a tea break or coffee break. You know, you can't duck into town to, you know, get your suit dry cleaned or pick up something for dinner tonight or whatever else it may be. You know, so those things have gone away. That interaction has gone away that you would have with people. So any thoughts on how, you know, again, I don't want to say we want to recreate that environment, but you know, surely there are some sort of things we can do, right, as a fun thing, as a social thing online. So any suggestions there?
Yeah, a few. I mean, it's quite true. You know, you really lose a lot of that. And for somebody who's fairly can be quite unstructured like me, you know, it's tough because I forget how much I rely upon chance encounters in the hall, or just chatting with people, or running into the guy on the bus in the way to work and talking about basketball that I used to have. So you have to make those. And that's the tough part, because it becomes work. It becomes something you have to do. There's a lot of different ways. You know, there's so many groups of people now coalescing in your neighborhood. You get to know all of your little coffee shops and restaurants and whatever a lot better, and you get to see who's working around. Through this, I discovered my across the hall neighbor was my colleague, which I never knew. I never knew until we were working from home and we were comparing notes on our experience, and we realized we worked at the same place. We had met each other, but we forgot.
Right.
So you get that kind of thing. So that's somebody that you can find people that are part of your group. A lot of organizations will do like a sort of a forced happy hour where they all get online together and raise a glass. But sometimes they have a lot of fun, trivia nights, quiz nights, movies together. So you can do some of those kinds of things. A lot of that's moved offline to chat. And so that's the challenge. Now that some places are opening up, you still can have a few meetings with people. So I just highly recommend, scheduling that in. If you can build in a once a week virtual real lunch with somebody. People who have family at home, it's a little easier because you do have people you're going to see all the time. People who are working by themselves, living by themselves, it can be quite isolating. So you kind of have to create it.
So I have a short example to give. So as people on the call who know me well, they know I have an affinity for red wine. So when this travel restrictions came into play and work from home kicked in, so a couple of my friends and we got together and said, let's do a wine night once a night. Very quickly, we realized that it wasn't working too well. And the reason for that is because all of us were in different time zones, including someone in Europe, someone in the US, I'm here in Australia. So for me to have a wine my evening would mean my friend would have to be having wine for his breakfast, so it got a bit challenging. So and why I'm bringing this up is that we need to realize that others that we are interacting with online may be in different circumstances, right? They may be in a different time zone. They may have a different personal or business environment that they're working in. So you can't assume that things will be the same and they can do the same for you as you can do for them. So I think being mindful of that is very important. Noel, one more round of Q&As. I see it seems to be quite a few there. So maybe you can pick a couple and then we'll need to wrap it up.
Sure. All right. We have one where asking, wondering that usually bosses can check on their employees when they're working in physical offices. Is it possible to do something like this online?
Checking on employees.
Checking up on them or checking in on them?
Well, I think checking in if they're working, like it's possible, it's easy to see whether they're working or not, I guess. But it's possible to do online.
So I'll give an example, which are not good examples, but I've got this friend of mine who, in the early stages of the lockdowns, he got his employees to send him selfies every 2 hours to prove that they were working. And I said to him, I hope you do realize they could just take a stream of selfies and send it to you by schedule and you wouldn't know any different. So maybe what you should be doing is focusing on what exactly the work output is and not worrying about whether they spend 8 or 10 hours a day working, but what the actual output is they have. If you gave them a task, was it completed? Have they reached whatever was set, whatever objective was set of them or goal was set of them? So there's things like that, but maybe Philip, you've got some better ideas than I have.
I had a more positive example, but yours was interesting. Wow, that's Singapore has a thing when you travel and you come back, you have to submit photos and things. So it's to prove that you're doing your stay-at-home notice on the quarantine. So it sounds like the same. I think you can do the check-ins with your employees. You can just make it with your teams. You can just make it a regular 15-minute thing and make sure it doesn't have an agenda. Make sure it's kind of at a good time and make sure it's a non-work discussion. If you're on a client together, whatever you're doing, that's a different time. So when I was at one place, I worked at one agency that you're required to have coffee with your direct reports once a month. It didn't be about anything. It was just relationship building.
Right.
So I think in this case, there's no coffee and it's got to be more often. But just to check in, and find a hobby or something you guys share and just talk about that. Just have a a moment that's just catching up. If there's something to discuss that's important, it'll come organically from that.
So yeah, so real social virtual time, right? I mean, I guess that's
yeah. Just be humans to each other.
yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Noel, any other questions? Maybe we can take two more and then we'll look to wrap it up.
Sure. So I think this has been already partially answered, but there's a question here on how do we keep our focus while working from home? And then another one is there are people who are, I suppose, not adequately digitally literate. How can we get them to gain confidence to start working from home?
Okay, I'll do the in focus and you can do the literacy one, Raj.
Sure.
How's that? The focus is hard because, you know, as we keep saying, this is not your workspace. You know, if we were designed to work from home, every house or apartment that you lived in would have an office built into it or some area, right? Which it doesn't. We have to make a study. We have to convert the living room. We have to do this stuff. So the hard part with the focus is it's a lot of your limits, and it's also just being able to stick with it because it just doesn't feel like you have the energy from the other people. When you're in an office and everybody's working together, you kind of, it's like if you work out by yourself at the gym, it's easier to just put the weights down and say, okay, I'm done. When you have a workout buddy, they come on, we'll do 2 more rounds. Okay, 2 more sets. And you'll do it. That's why we take exercise classes. So the challenge is being that person for yourself. Lot of breaks, lot of ways to reconnect. Do things, you know, find ways to make it interesting. If you have a coffee shop you can run down to, work from there. You know, like just build in breaks that you have something interesting going on besides the monotony of staring at a computer in your living room. And just understand that, like anything else, your brain will lose focus. That's normal. So it's not your job to stop your brain from being your brain. It's your job to understand my brain is tired, it needs something. So go eat, go cook, go talk to somebody, go do something that's, you know, you, and then it's easier to get back to it.
That's very true. Very true.
Yeah.
On the digital literacy one, you know, I think so. Again, that's been problematic for a long, long time. You know, I think a lot of people have been saying, you know, consultants, intergovernmental organizations, educators, that we need to get our digital literacy skills in order. And again, I think we've hit that wall now that people realize that, you know, the confidence levels are not there for some employees, right? I think the younger generation are probably dealing with it better, but they're parts of the older generation or those who were not used to working with IT and ICTs to this level and with this frequency. I think they've been struggling. In terms of how to fix it, you know, I think some of that would have to go on to the actual companies and organizations themselves. I think there needs to be some sort of reskilling or upskilling programs in place to ensure that employees can actually cope with the new digital environment they need to function in. I know some organizations have these things, but I think it probably needs a bit of a rethink now, because ultimately the employee you have is doing things for you and your organization, right? It's not, yes, they have a job that pays for their bread and butter, but ultimately the human resources still remains key to any organization's functioning. So investing in your employees, I think, becomes very, very important from that perspective, which means, you know, skills development, professional development, and I think a greater emphasis on digital literacy skills, which, you know, many organizations are now providing. And, you know, and things like that you're doing, Phillip, for instance, in trying to prepare people to work from home and how they will be able to function in that sort of environment. I see a couple of questions on security that we're passing through. So I'm going to put another of my colleagues, Aftab, on the spot here. Aftab, if you haven't logged off, there's a question here that's about ensuring better security. For instance, if server and storage administration related works, doing that from home, there's a security element that comes into play, right? And so, no, IT or cybersecurity has been problematic from many dimensions. So, Aftab, are you still with us? Do you want to have a go at answering that?
Well, absolutely. I'm here with all of you listening to the interesting conversation because one thing I learned after joining ISOC that now we have to work from home. So I've been working from home. So we know this very well, that how it is unfolding for many people. Um, uh, just so that people can see me as well. Sorry. Is so security aspect is different in many cases, right? So many offices have provided VPNs to their main network that you can dial in and then connect to it. The other things which many offices or the workplaces are doing is making sure that you do not download emails like the way you used to download it at home at the office. So you just use the web interface, and so that you whatever security mechanism is there, it is covering you for any security loophole. But for the service provider, now it has become more interesting that they have. So initially it was the workspace or the enterprise IT who was managing the security of the overall infrastructure, but now everybody is moving back home, and now the onus is on the service provider of individual uh, person who is providing the services to them, to make sure that they are, number one, as you talk about, they are providing the services uninterrupted, but they are making sure that they are protecting all their subscribers. It's not just home user watching Netflix. Now they are using that internet for their job, and making sure that they are protecting them from any malicious activity. They are protecting them from any, of course, DDoS or anything, or any ransomware attack as much as possible. A lot of things are on the application layer, but still, whatever they can. So yes, the onus has shifted just from the enterprise IT to the service provider as well. So it has become a mix of both, rather than just your IT department will look after everything. You don't have to worry about it. But now it has the service provider has a role to play as well.
Thanks, Aftab, for that. And just for the benefit of people listening in, we do realize cybersecurity and these sort of security issues are a major issue. So as it so happens, one of our next APEC Insights will actually cover the issue of cybersecurity and how you can protect not just yourself while working from home, but what sort of things that companies and organizations need to look into in this new normal sort of setting where we're working from home. Because as Aftab outlined it brings up a whole a range of new issues into play, which we probably didn't have when we were working in the office environment, the physical office environment. So please keep a watch out for one of our future sessions where we will cover that in much greater detail with some great speakers. So with that, we're pretty much at the end of the session now, Philip. It's, I think, been an interesting set of discussions. I think we've covered a broad range of things, from social interactions right down to technology to we even touched a bit on government policy or the lack of it in some places. Any parting thoughts before we call it end of session?
Just that this is still very fresh. I think that we judge it. We're a very quick take society in general, thanks to the internet. Always quickly putting some sort of evaluation or final word about something. This is really still in progress. In the course of this type of, if you look at people who've been working in offices, let's say a few hundred years in some form, this is 6 months, 8 months. We're really very new at this. So it's natural that we're going to go through some different phases and learnings and improve and change. So it's really hard to say this is, great or terrible or going to be the future. It's definitely going to impact how we work in the future. Exactly what that means, we don't know. We all say that, but we don't know. So the main thing is just keep at it. If it's not working right now, it can be working in a couple of weeks. If it's not set up the way you want it to be, keep tweaking and playing with it. It's a real work in progress, and that's how we're all going to keep improving it.
I absolutely agree. It's an evolving environment. There's things we're learning as we go along.
Yeah.
The world really has, at least the modern world, has never faced this sort of thing in the past. So what we can say for certain, however, is that things will change in the future in how we do a lot of things, right? And if nothing else, I think the realization that digital technologies and digital infrastructure are so very critical for the whole global economy to function. In fact, it's not just about one little bit somewhere, but it's the whole global economy. And for that very reason, we need to ensure that, of course, the internet remains open, accessible, connected, and everyone's able to enjoy the benefits of the internet. And right now, it's helping us in so many ways. So there's a real need to protect that. So with that, thanks very much, Phillip, for your time. Much appreciated. And I hope people who joined in across Zoom and Facebook and all the other platforms we were simulcasting on, you all found it of some use. And we hope to see you again next time. So with that, cheers and have a great rest of the day, evening, afternoon, or morning. Cheers.